The mind is a name that we give to the policy of affirming one's finity. The assertion of individuality is known as mind. It is a pressure exerted upon the limitedness of our personality. And there is no such thing as mind independently existing as we may imagine it to be. Childlike considerations may form the opinion that the mind is something moving inside the body, like a ball of mercury changing its position frequently, but within the body only. No such thing is the mind. It cannot be located as something. It is, to explain it precisely, the body asserting itself. I am. The body feels it is. That feeling of physical existence with great vehemence is termed mind for purpose of easy comprehension. Fickleness is the nature of the mind. It will never occupy a particular position. This is because the physical affirmation spoken of is a tantalizing phenomenon not sure of itself. The body does not finally know what it wants. That is to say, the mind so-called does not know what it wants. This is so because there is a contradiction between the affirmation of individuality through the physical body and the infinite longings that seem to be there lying at the back of the personality. The infinite longing contradicts the finite affirmation. And therefore life is before us as a great contradiction. Everywhere we see problems. And no problem is finally capable of solution. Kings and ministers, statesmen work hard throughout their life since centuries to solve the problems of life. But they go, the problems remain. The reason is life is constituted of an insoluble contradiction. Inasmuch as the very basis of our existence is contradiction, no one can find a solution to it. But is there not a way? The very longing within us is a pointer to the problem capable of solution. Our longings are so firm, so convincing, so irrefutable, so unrelenting, that he seemed to be enshrining within our own selves a non-finite impulse to which I made a reference yesterday. Simultaneously with the finite impulse of bodily affirmation. The control of the mind is therefore equal to the finding of the solution between the finite and the infinite. Great persistence, great understanding and capacity to discriminate is called for. Ancient masters and seekers of truth, to one of whom I made reference yesterday, had their own way of solution. Sometimes the solution seemed to be very humorous, but very practical. The mind has to be dealt in a very intelligent manner, but persistently. When you drive a nail continuously on the wall at the same spot, but not changing the spot, with the determination to drive the nail into the wall, it will go inside and yield to your pressure. But if you strike at one place, you find a brick, another place a stone, the third place something else, and you will not succeed in driving the nail at all. In a similar manner, several methods have to be adopted. Continuous determination to achieve a purpose. And this determination takes various phases of expression. It is not that everyone can manifest this determination in the same way. There is a world under every hat, and there is a different type of solution within every individual. My solution is not yours, and yours is not somebody else's. Peculiarity, novelty, and a kaleidoscopic character of the method to be adopted. All these are some of the features of spiritual determination. There are some humorous instances which I shall mention to you, adopted by great saints and sages. You will be inclined to laugh at these analogies, but they are very practical and prove very useful. There was a great saint called Swaminarayan. His followers are very large, even in the area of Gujarat, though he himself hailed from Uttar Pradesh. One day, he observed some villagers struggling with a cow. They were unable to milk it because it was giving a kick the moment anybody approached it. You cannot go near the cow. Even when it feels that somebody is coming near it, it will give a kick with its foot. Swaminarayan was not only a saint but also a seeker in himself, told these villagers, I shall find a way of stopping this kicking. He took a long stick a little away from the cow and slowly touched the legs of the cow with that stick. It gave a kick immediately because it cannot tolerate any touch. After a few seconds, he again touched it, it gave another kick. He sat there whole day without taking food, from morning to evening, doing only one work, touching the legs of the cow with the stick. To the surprise of all people who were witnessing this phenomenon. For continuous 12 hours as it were, this touching went on. How long will the cow give a kick? It is also a living being. It got fed up, tired, and stopped kicking. Now he said, you will the cow. It never kicked afterwards. The mind is turbulent in some way of this kind. It has to be treated in the same way as the Swami treated the cow. Whatever you say, the mind will not agree to. It has its own voice and something else to say, quite different from what you are wanting it to do. If you say this, it will say no. I will do another. There were a couple, husband and wife. The wife was a termagant. She will always do the opposite of what the husband says. If he says, today, will you prepare some good meal with some coconut powder? No, I will not put coconut, she will say. She will make a thin, watery dal and give him. Then he will say, today I am not feeling well. I don't want to make any good dish. I want only a little thin, watery dal. No, I will make good dish today. And she made a sumptuous meal. And he took it. Today some venerable guests are coming. Will you cook some good meal for me? No, I will not. I will give only water to the guest. Then when the visitors were actually expected, he told the wife, today I am not expecting anybody and I don't think any special feeding is necessary. No, I will make a very good meal for 20 people. And she cooked 20 people's food and the visitors came and they were fed. This is what the mind is telling. I will not listen to you. You say anything, I have got some other way. But how will you deal with it? The same way as this husband dealt or the Swaminarayan dealt with the situations. Sometimes, if you may be a failure in offering a frontal attack to the mind, direct attack is not always going to be a success even in military operations. Great wisdom is to be exercised. You have to retreat. You have to move forward. You have to become invisible for some time. There was a fierce bull. If you see any human being from a distance, it will make a hissing noise through his nose. There was a gentleman who decided to control that bull. How you will control? You cannot go near it. What he did was, he built a fencing around the fierce bull. Now, one step of success has been taken. That is to say, the bull cannot go outside the limit of the fencing. Previously, it could roam about anywhere and attack anyone on the road. Now it cannot do because fencing is put out. Likewise, do to the mind. It goes everywhere, roaming throughout the world, wanting anything and rejecting anything. Put a fence over it, within this limit only operate. Give whatever it wants within a limitation, but don't deny anything to it. The bull was within the fence. The next step was the gentleman took a bundle of green grass, thrust his hand through the wire fencing and showed it, here is the grass. And he slowly came to them. He knew very well the ferocity of the bull. You cannot touch it. But because of the grass, he forgot the man outside and was thinking only of the grass. He fed it every day. Daily this was the only work, feeding the grass, so that the bull became acquainted with the personality of this individual. Every day he sees the same person. Then, without the grass also, it could touch its forehead like this. And it would just look. Then he lessened the circle of the fencing, made it very limited, so that it is not more than a few square yards. And he could go on patting it with the hand continuously and feeding it also with green grass. Acquaintance became so intense, it started slowly licking the hand of this gentleman. It developed an affection. Fierce it was. Animosity was of nature. It became friendly because of this affectionate treatment. It yielded to his touch. Then he removed the fencing, went near it with the grass. Without the fencing, he went near it, touched it, gave the grass, patted it on the head. You will be wondering, he sat on its back. Can you imagine the success? To the surprise again of all people. The ways of saints, the methods adopted by masters and seekers of yore are very interesting. They are not always logically rigid, but beautifully construed methodology of handling the mind. I have told you many years back perhaps a Sufi saint story. There was a great mystic called Jalaluddin Rumi in Baghdad in the Middle Ages. He had many followers. He recited an instance of how a person can change himself by changing the circumstances. That Sufi Guru had several followers and disciples. Many of the disciples are poor Arabs, but very devoted to the master. One of them came in the early morning to pay homage to the master. The master asked, "How are you, my dear boy?" "Master, I am living in hell." "What is the trouble with you?" "I have one room only to manage with, which is a small area where I have my family, my wife and 2 children. There inside it I cook the food. I have a camel which brays continuously. Sometimes it gives a kick also. And there is a dog barking whole night. We cannot sleep. You can imagine our condition. Don't you think, Master, this is veritable hell?" The master said, "There is no problem, I can solve this difficulty." The obedience of the disciple to the master was so amazing especially in ancient times, that they will not argue with the Guru, though his suggestions may look very funny, irrational, and sometimes very idiotic. But devotion, submission to the Guru, supersedes rationality. The Guru told the disciple, tonight, you tie the dog inside your house, then you go to bed. He could not understand what kind of solution is this. But obedience is obedience. The dog made matters worse. It went on barking inside the room and howling throughout the night. Nobody slept even for a minute. The disciple went to the Guru next morning. Hello, how are you? I cannot say anything. Worse than hell. The dog did not allow us to sleep, even the little that we had earlier. There is a solution for it. You have got a camel, tie it inside. He said, what is this? Am I going to be alive? But Guru is Guru. No word against him. He tied the camel inside the room. There was no space to sit. The camel occupied the entire area and making any kind of thing, kicks, jumps, kicking also, and dog barking also, and the fireplace giving sparks out, and the children crying, and the wife standing only, and he was also sitting. And next morning he went and said, I cannot speak, master. I am dying today. I think today is the last day for me. I thought it is hell. This is worse than hell. I will find a solution for it. Tie the camel out. Put the dog also out. They slept very well that night. No noise, no disturbance of anything. Next morning he went to the Guru. How are you? Heaven, he said. Heaven. Hey, you came to me in the beginning saying it is hell. Now how it has become heaven? He said. The mind is a great mystery. It can deceive you every moment and tell you everything is wrong, nothing is good anywhere. Everybody is foolish. The world is a devil's abode. It is better to be rid of it. It will go on telling all kinds of things. But yet, till the last moment of your breath, the longing to live long will not leave you. If I had lived a little long, you may be a patient with incurable disease, utterly poverty-stricken, but you would like to continue the existence in this body as much as possible. Nobody would like to abolish the personality, destroy one's individuality, negate one's existence. What is it that you are longing for? Stories of this kind, analysis of this nature will tell you that again here is a contradiction in your life. Your opinion about people and the world, and sometimes about your own predicament, contradicts the endless longing that you maintain within yourself for anything and everything. Death is a terror. Nothing can be worse than that, because it is the end of your existence. You will tolerate the end of anything that you possess, but you cannot tolerate the end of your being itself. So, your affection centralizes itself later on into a pinpointed existence of your own location. I must be. I may not want anything else. Let the world go. Let all things leave me. But may I live long, may I persist, may I exist forever and ever. Who generates this feeling of endless longing? If not that which is your real nature, to which again I made some brief reference yesterday. What kind of longing is this? In the beginning it is very nebulous and not clear to your mind. That is why you cannot answer the question, why do you want to live long? There is no why for it, it is there and it has to be accepted. For final issues, there is no why. Whatever be my situation in this world, I would like to live for any number of years. Even if you are granted a blessing of 1000 years of living, that cannot satisfy you, because when you are completing the tenure of 9,909 years, the fear will strike you, only 1 year is left. As powerful as the fear of death would be if you are to pass away earlier. So the lengthened life is not a solution. Because how long will that lengthened life continue? It will end one day. When the great seeker Nachiketas was offered all the glories of the world by the great master Yama, longest life. Nachiketas' reply was, Api sarvam jivitam alpameva tavayavaha tavanutya jive. The longest life is short when it comes to an end. So there is no such thing as long life, because when it ends it is short. So what do you mean by saying that I want to live long? Here again is a psychological contradiction before us. Actually what insists on your continuing for a long time is not this body calling for a persistent existence. Because the mind is clever enough to know that the body cannot last long. But it wants to accumulate certain features which will give it the satisfaction of living long. The central feature of this longing is the longing to have our own selves. Atmanam Buddhi. Know thyself and be free. Though we hear these admonitions 100 times, we will make the common mistake of identifying the self with this so-called person seated here. Let me know my Atma. You will say, my Atma, as if you are going to possess it as a property. If the Atman is to be possessed by you, it stands outside you like an object, like any other thing in the world. If you are going to possess the Atman, who are you then? Other than the Atman is Anatman. Anatman is non-existence. Is non-existence trying to possess existence? Here is again a contradiction in our thinking. Great discrimination is called for. Vairagya is the name of this discrimination. Easily do we mistake the principle of Vairagya. So many sadhus are there, so many Vairagis are there. They have all renounced everything. You may ask any venerable Vairagi, you have renounced everything. What are the things that you have renounced? The immediate answer that the quick urge will prompt the reply is, I possess nothing. I have left everything that I had earlier. I have left the world. Therefore, I have completed my renunciation. If you have abandoned the world, where are you standing now? Are you sitting in the skies? Standing on the ground, which is the earth, you are saying that I have renounced it. The world blows a breeze of various types on your personality every moment, saying that you cannot renounce the world unless you renounce yourself first. The renouncer has to renounce himself so that the renunciation may become complete. But where is the meaning in renouncing one's own self? If the self is renounced, what remains behind? This difficulty will suddenly take possession of our own self. There is no such thing, really speaking, as renunciation of anything. Because nothing in the world really belongs to you. So, how can you renounce a thing which does not really become your property? Are you renouncing somebody's property? The world is not under your control. Therefore, how will you renounce it? Here, renunciation has to be understood in the spirit that is within it. Renunciation is not an abandonment in the literal sense of the word, but a spirit that is maintained within. A spirit of not belonging to anything, and a spirit of nothing actually belonging to one's own self. In this process of determination of the spirit, the world stands united with you because of the fact that you are made up of the same substance as the world of nature. All humanity is inside you, with you, within you, and has taken possession of you. The principle of every individual in the world is inside you also. So that on different occasions, you can manifest the character of any person in this world. Anything is inside you. Only the proper button has to be pushed. All humanity is potentially present inside you. The world is potentially present inside you. Inside in the sense of that personality of yours, which is clubbed with the whole nature at the same time, and not this Mr. So-and-so personality. Here is the difficulty that the mind will encounter every day. You cannot think in this manner. Our education is purely empirical, outward motivated, and physically conditioned, that when I tell you, you stand a master of all things by renunciation in the sense of belonging to the whole world, sarva bhuta ite rata, The world belonging to you and yourself belonging to the world. The world stands, including all personality and all individuals, all human beings, every created living being, including yourself. The world stands renounced within itself. You become a world individual. Such renunciates are world masters because they are self-masters. When the taste for things ceases, we have conquered the world. Jitam sarvam jite rase. When the taste is conquered, the world is conquered. Taste of the tongue, taste of the eyes, taste of the ears, taste of the nostrils, which breathe fragrance, taste of touch. All these are tastes of one kind or the other. They persist till our death almost because of the fact we never succeeded in living as world individuals. You have never succeeded in maintaining the position of a world personality. Can any one of you feel convinced within yourself you are a world individual? I do not merely belong to the world. It is not that the world belongs to me. I stand as a meeting point of the world and the individuality of everybody. Unthinkable is this situation. Mastermind, we call such people. Supermen, we say. Incarnations, avatara, we say. All sorts of names and nomenclatures are attributed to such achievements in a person who ceases to be a person at the same time. To me at least, Swami Shivananda Maharaj was such a person. The greatest renunciation can be seen in him. And the greatest power of grabbing and grasping can be seen in him. And the greatest longing for Brahma Sakshatkara can be seen in him. Such masters are called Mahatyagis, Mahabhoktas. In the sense that all things belong to them, they are world enjoyers, Mahabhoktas. In the sense that nothing really belongs to them, they are Mahatyagis. You may say, this is all beyond me. I am not meant for it. I am a householder. I am a poor fellow. I have got entanglements. The entanglement is in your mind only, which refuses to yield to this instruction. You have created a hell, as that disciple of the Sufi master was, according to him, living in a hell. But his adjustment of mind made him feel that he is in heaven in utter freedom itself. The mind can make a hell and heaven in one instant. Turn the switch on one side, it is hell. Turn the switch on the other side, it is heaven. Both the switches are here, in the heart of your heart. This renunciation precedes the understanding that is required to practice yoga, which is real sadhana. The essence of this situation is that we cannot entertain little petty desires and then sit for meditation. As I mentioned to you, when you are seated in meditation, a kind of infinitude enters into you, as is suggested in the Sutra of Patanjali in his Yoga Shastra. Ananta Samapatti Bhyam. Your steadiness in posture is possible by a comprehension of the infinitude that this world is. Prayatna Shaithilyat Ananta Samapatti Bhyam. Relaxation and the concept of the infinite will enable you to occupy a desired posture. Relaxation. The nerves are tense, the muscles are tense, the mind is tense, the body is tense. They have to be released in a fashion akin to what you have heard as Yoga Nidra. It is not Nidra. It is so called because of its resemblance to non-perception of anything outside, similar to Nidra Sthiti, the condition of sleep. Before you sit in a posture for meditation, lie on your back, stretch your arms aside, take deep breathing. Take in through the nostrils and breathe out through the mouth. As you do generally, automatically, when you are tired after a long journey or hard work, oh God, the day of work is over, let me lie down. You are not aware of anything at that time except that you want nothing but total relaxation. As the mind is connected to the body intimately, the mind also gets relaxed at that time together with the relaxation of the nerves and the muscles. For a few minutes you can meditate even in that posture. It is not necessary that you sit up with a rigidity of feeling at the outset itself. As long as it is comfortably possible for you to contemplate your ideal even in that posture of lying on the back, let it be, you continue. Because the mind will not enable you to concentrate on anything when the body is feeling any kind of pain or discomfort. When you catch hold of the mind, you cannot reject the body. The rider on the ass is connected with the ass. So you cannot displease the ass even when you are riding over it. So body and mind go together as a psycho-biological individuality. You cannot say I am the body or I am not the body, I am the mind or I am not the mind. These statements have no meaning finally. It is a child's definition of what you are. You are an integrated affirmation wherein are blended both the mental structure and the physical structure. So, a kind of relaxation caused by satisfaction of having achieved an end should follow simultaneously with the effort at meditation. But it is not an effort actually speaking. Because Patanjali Maharshi has told you Prayatna Shaitilya, loosen your tension of effort. Don't say I am doing something. Because this consciousness of doing something is again an assertion of individuality and a potential of egoism manifesting itself. Just be in a state of complete psychophysical relaxation, either by lying down or in any other comfortable posture. Really speaking, for the purpose of meditation, there is no particular posture prescribed. As is comfortable, so is the posture. The Yoga Shastra does not say sit only in this posture. Though sometimes for certain reasons, a particular seated posture is suggested. But every rule has an exception. In a similar manner, this general instruction to be seated with spine erect and neck straight, etc., can be regarded as a very practicable posture, provided you don't feel any discomfort in that posture. Dissatisfaction of any kind should not precede the effort at meditation. How the yoga practice commences is stated sometime in this manner in the Yoga Shastra. Then I repeat once again what I told you in the end yesterday. Be clear as to what you are seeking. The object of meditation is the final choice that you make in this world. You have selected it as the ultimate meaning for your life. There are people who cling to certain things throughout their life and they consider that particular thing as the be-all and end-all of their life. Rightly or wrongly, they have hugged that particular thing through their emotional clamoring. But this is a very treacherous attitude of the emotions. It will leave you in the lurk at any moment and compel you. You may take months to decide what it is that can give you great satisfaction. There are devotees who choose the form of a divinity, the ultimate Godhead manifests before them in some form which they regard as final. The reason why they consider that form as final is that they are sure that the infinite longing for salvation is centralized in that particular form of divinity, as the entire potentiality of the power of the sun is hidden in a single ray of the sun. So the whole world in one object. You strike one object to the core, an atomic bomb manifests itself. Strike it further, you will find the treasures of the world coming up. from inside the very object that you have struck again and again by the hammering of mental process. Strike it further. You will find that this mind which you meditate is the meeting point of all the levels of creation commingling in one point. Like the sea at the meeting point of a river where the two become one. In this initial stage of meditation, even in this initial stage, you will see that you rise up from meditation as a new individual, as if something has entered you, injected into you. Molten iron is injected as it were, making you feel that adamantine is your body. Old habits still persist. स्थान उपनिमंत्रणे संगस्मय आकरणम पुनरनिष्ट प्रसंगात is a sutra of Patanjali. Never feel satisfied with any experience, because any satisfying experience in meditation, sound, color, perception of beauty, fragrance, etc., should not attract you, because that is as temporary and tantalizing as any other presentation in this physical world. Actually, what you call heaven is only a rarefied form of earthly enjoyment. Highly potentized form of sensory experience is heaven. Grossen form of it is the earth. When such presentations are placed before you, Sangasmaya Akaranam, don't smile. Oh, you have come. Wonderful. No. It is a mask put on by a tremendous deceptive force before you. The world opposes you in the beginning. Vehemently it will oppose you, and it will see that you do not succeed. People will harass you, condemn you, criticize you, and say this is a crack. And the world will present further difficulties, causing you a tremble in your personality, as if you have gone wrong. I have told many a time, on earlier occasions, when you churn the mind for the sake of the treasure that you see, treasure will not come, only poison comes. As illustrated in the story of Amrita Manthana in the Srimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, wanting nectar, you churn the ocean, deadly poison comes in the beginning. What is the deadly poison actually speaking? Where from it arises? It is the potentiality of attachment still persisting at the last moment of the death of individuality. When a cobra is about to die, it becomes most poisonous. That time it strikes, it is a death strike. Likewise, the last kick that human desire gives you is a poisonous smoke of discomfiture and sorrow and indecision of every kind. You know how many treasures afterwards slowly arose from the churning of the ocean in Amrita Manthana. Some 14 stages are described there as the ratnas or jewels, tempting more and more as the succeeding one arises, so that the temptation to possess it rises in greater intensity Finally, you know what happened to these people who actually wanted nectar. A great story indeed in the Srimad Bhagavata Mahapurana. This is a story about our own selves. The gods and the demons, the ocean, the nectar, the treasures, the jewels and the rubies, the poison. All are inside us. Inside in every sense of the term, outwardly, inwardly, and also in the blend of both. Knowing well that such things are possible before us, through the guidance that we have received from our great master, whom we should not desert till the end of your life. Knowing this well, march forward. Hari Om Tat Sat.